Hi, and welcome to Deep Leadership. I'm your host, John Rennie. Today, we're digging into the hard truth that strategy alone doesn't move the needle. People do. My guest, Willie Pietersen, has led billion-dollar companies, taught at Columbia Business School, and advised some of the world's top organizations. And what he's learned is this: without strong leadership, even the smartest strategy will fail. In this episode, we explore why your values matter more than your plans, how to earn trust before you cast vision, and why asking the right questions is more powerful than having all the answers. This is a conversation about leading with character, clarity, and purpose. So, are you ready to dive in? Let's get started.
Thank you so much, John. Pleasure to be on.
Oh, it's an honor to have you on the show, sir. And we had a great talk before we pressed record, and it's an honor to have you on the show. And I'm really thankful for what you're doing in terms of writing, in terms of teaching the next generation of leaders, if you will. So, but first of all, I mean, you've had an amazing life and career as a leader. Uh, why did you decide to write this book, and what was your hope for the book when you wrote it?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's my third book, John, and my first two books were on strategy. And strategy is the field that I've concentrated on at Columbia. I've been at Columbia now 28 years, believe it or not. And my colleagues began to call me Mr. Strategy. But I began to discover something interesting, and it echoed my own personal experiences as CEO over a period of 20 years. In my various consulting work with numerous companies and helping them do strategy, um, those that did really well in applying the concepts and tools that I provided were those that had the most effective leadership. And I began to realize that strategy doesn't have an independent life.
Mm.
It's an essential part of the way we lead. And it's part of a holistic idea of what leadership is all about. But it really comprises three domains: leadership of self, that's personal leadership; strategic leadership, which is giving the organization a clear sense of direction, a winning way, and clear priorities; and then interpersonal leadership, bringing out the best in others. And the personal leadership aspect is critically important. It's the threshold requirement is, being clear on your values, being transparent and authentic, and that's the source of your ability to persuade others. You began to realize that these factors that surround strategy are crucial aspects of being an effective strategic leader. And then I began to test this idea more and more in the classroom with corporate executives in our programs, and began to realize that this idea of an integrated approach to leadership resonated pretty strongly. So I thought, well, I've had a wonderful learning laboratory through my career. I'm a great believer that the test of a good theory is its usefulness in practice. And I felt, well, here's a way to look at leadership holistically as an integrated set of elements and putting strategy in its proper context as part of leadership. And that's why I wrote my third book on leadership.
I absolutely love that. When I teach, one of the things I talk about, my background is in, my first job was a submarine officer, right? And I tell people that it's the crew that brings a ship to life. Like you have this massive piece of technology, but without a crew, you it's going nowhere, right? So you need a crew to bring your submarine to life. And I always tell the students that you need you need people to bring your plans to life, and you're hitting right on that. Like strategy is useless unless you have a team of people that can execute on that strategy. So and I love the idea that leadership is this holistic approach to leadership, and if you're going to have an effective execution of strategy, you need leadership, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I love your metaphor. A ship without a crew is an empty vessel that goes nowhere, right?
Right.
And it is a reminder, it was Confucius who said, if you want to be a leader, you must first be a human being.
Mm.
And I think it's a reminder that, things happen through people.
Mm.
Um, Success happens through people, and great success happens through inspired people. And, I began to realize there's a useful distinction between management and leadership. They're both important, obviously, but management is about things. It's about processes. It's about budgets. It's about getting things done, operations. And leadership is about people. And the other element of it, and you were on this crew on a submarine. I'm sure you were, as an officer, in a position of command. It's also a reminder, and I think Peter Drucker is the one who reminded us of this, that leadership is not about power, it's about service.
Hmm.
And I think that's also a pretty important thing. The service element brings us back to connecting with people and inspiring people. And power has got a kind of a coercive element involved in its idea and its core. So I like that Peter Drucker formulation that it's ultimately about service. It's making a difference to the lives of others, a positive difference.
Yes. Yeah. And I see that. And also, I think we're making a difference in people's lives, but also as part of that strategy is giving them the direction in which we're heading. I mean, we as leaders, we take that input from other people, right? But we have to put the rudder in the water and steer the ship. We've got to set the direction. And so part of our jobs is to treat, have that service element, but also, provide that guidance of here's where we're going and here's why we're going there.
Yeah, yeah, it's back to the integration of those three elements.
Yeah. Yeah.
The interesting thing that any given moment of time, you might need to put the emphasis on one aspect rather than the other, depending on the issues that you're confronting. But at the end of the day, none of them works in isolation from the others.
Hmm.
Having a brilliant strategy without having inspired people and having that kind of buy-in to it through participation and involvement in it, that doesn't take you very far. But at the end of the day, it's an interesting thing. I often get asked, where do you begin? Well, they work together synergistically. But there is, for me, a threshold requirement, and that is personal leadership, being an authentic and transparent leader who genuinely cares about others and has a sound set of values. That's the source of your inspiration. Marcus Aurelius, I'm a fan of philosophy. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and philosopher, called this our command center.
Hmm.
And I love that. It's an internal command center. It's the way we command our own conduct, our own set of beliefs and values. And I think this is something that we don't typically think deeply enough about in terms of its importance. And again, it's a reminder because that's where we build character. We build our character through our values. And leadership, again, is a kind of a combination of competence and character. But I think character matters more. And it's the kind of catalyst that gives energy to competence.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, and I love that idea of you know this personal leadership, the command center part of it. I think that's without that, without your values, right, people don't know where you stand. So I think we need to
Yeah,
have our values, and we have to be very clear with our values. Otherwise people, they can't trust us. They don't know where we stand, so they need to know that we have some sort of a center, right? And we have said, like, we have a compass of what's right and wrong, and our employees sense that through our actions and our words, that we do have a center and we have a direction. I think the best leaders have that. They have that internal compass.
totally. Totally
Yeah.
agree with you. And it's applied consistently, not erratically.
Right.
So it makes you somewhat predictable, not totally, but people will go and say, well, we've got this very challenging issue to deal with, and we're going to take it to John with a recommendation. We have a really good idea of where he comes out because we know where he stands on issues like this.
Yeah.
So, it makes you that kind of almost, as you say, consistent and predictable in terms of the way you deal with issues.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in this book, I was reading through some of the things you've done in this latest book, and one of the things you talk about is that you offer ideas with energy. I love that idea. So tell us a little bit about what is an idea with energy.
Well, if everything we know in the world comes from a question somebody asked, and whether it's in science or in general knowledge. And so, we need to ask questions that have energy behind them. In other words, there's idle curiosity, which is just wondering why. And then there's energetic curiosity, which says, I need to have an answer and I'll pursue it, even though it's hard, because the answer is important.
Mm.
So ideas with energy, for me, that's what leads to productive action. It informs action. Um, I grew up in East London, a smallish town on the coastline of South Africa. And I recall in my childhood, let's say I was about 8 or 10 years old at the time, I had a map of the world on the wall in front of my bed. And the interesting thing is the window to my left let in the morning sun and shone on this map. And I used to lie there and stare at this map of the entire world. And one day I put a pin in the place where I was living in East London, at the very tip of Africa, a completely insignificant place on the scale of the whole globe. And I began a certain yearning that I wanted to explore as much of this big wide world and all its cultures, all its variations, all of its perspectives and experiences while I have this lucky journey of being alive. And that's been a spur to me throughout my entire life. And what I've derived great joy from in my corporate role is working in different cultures and countries and so on. And that's been an idea with energy for me because it has spurred me to act on it. And I did it with, it's been a very enriching time as a result. But I often think back about that pin in the map. That was my idea with energy, is
Yeah.
to lead that kind of life of exploring the entire world.
Yeah, yeah, I really like that. And and you touched on this too, the idea of questions with energy too is kind of interesting. So you say that as a leader, it's important that we ask the right questions. And so let's unpack that a little bit with this idea of energy, right? So why is the right question important for leaders to get out there? What does that do to the organization when the right question's asked?
Again, it's another undervalued aspect of leading effectively is the ability to ask great questions. Beware of answers without great questions in front of them. And I come back to the issue that all we really know about in the world comes from a question somebody posed. Einstein didn't sit there playing his violin and suddenly, E equals mc squared. It didn't just fly into his head. It came from a set of questions that he posed that were very challenging, and he pursued the answers in a very diligent, energetic way. Um, it was really, I'm back to philosophy, but it really was Socrates who turned the way we learn upside down. Prior to Socrates, there were these sophists who toured Greece teaching people the power of rhetoric, dazzling speeches that impress your audience. Socrates looked at this and said, that's not a good learning model. I learn very little from repeating what I already know, he said, and the audience learns very little from what's pushed at them without their participation. He actually looked at his mother's profession as a metaphor. She was a midwife. And he said, aha, she doesn't give birth to babies, but she facilitates their delivery. In the same way, I don't give birth to ideas, but I facilitate their delivery. And the method of delivery was by asking great questions. Now, there are all kinds of examples that come to the fore when I think about it. I mentioned one very compelling example. For me, at least, it's been really compelling about the power of asking the right question. It goes back to the Revolutionary War, 1776 in the US. Apologies to international listeners. It's an American example, but it's instructive for everybody. And there were 13 independent British colonies at the time, all separate. They had their separate militias. And when the Continental Congress decided to embark on this war of independence, they asked the 13 colonies to combine under the leadership of George Washington as their commander. They didn't even have the same uniforms. They'd never trained together. They were not seasoned campaigners in the military sense. And they were confronting the most formidable fighting force in the world at the time, the British Army. Well, not surprisingly, in the early stages, They were very much in retreat. Things looked pretty dismal in terms of the prospects. Now, from the journals that the historians have been able to assemble, David McCulloch, for example, the story emerges that at that dismal stage, Washington put his senior officers in a circle of discussion and said, all right, we're at a critical moment. We're losing right now, and we have to confront this reality. We cannot continue with this strategy, this approach. And he said, here's my question. How can we defeat the British? And it went round and around and around, and every answer was found to be totally impractical because it was asymmetrical in terms of power and experience and resources. And after a good while of this, creative tussle that was going on, one of the officers raised his hand and said, I think we're asking the wrong question. There's no good answer to that question. The right question is, how can we avoid losing?
Hmm.
Now, that question won a war, literally, because it gave rise to an idea that didn't exist before. That's kind of a generative question is what I call those. It gave birth to the idea of commando raids. That was a very unusual thing to do at the time, the 18th century. It was all set pieces at that time in battles. That was quick surprise raids on the British columns, rapid withdrawal before taking losses to preserve your resources and your men. And the theory was, we'll keep doing this and exhaust the British, and they will go home. And it worked with the help of the French and the final push 6 years later. But that single question was the breakthrough in the thinking that led to winning the Revolutionary War, almost literally so. And there are many examples of this kind. I'll give you one more from the military, seeing we're on this question. I think it's a very important thing as a leadership skill to ask the right questions. Now, the military have a process called the after-action review. You might be familiar with it. You were in the Navy. I'm sure the Navy had the same. And after every engagement, they answer 4 questions in a very rigorous process in this after-action review. I've participated in a number of those, actually, with the Army War College, with forgiveness to the Navy, in Carlisle, in Pennsylvania,
Yes.
run by a Colonel Campbell, and it was rigorous and, demonstrated how it works. But it's based on 4 questions. It's based on questions. After every engagement, what was meant to happen? What actually happened? Why did it happen? How can we do better next time? Now, this has led to breakthroughs in thinking. It shifts the needle from blaming to learning. And that's a crucial thing. It's not who do we blame, but what have we learned? And I think applying this in the corporate world, I think is a very important thing. I've got a little formula that I offer companies in my consulting work. You're going to make mistakes. We all try and take prudent risks, right? If you're trying to avoid all mistakes, you're not making good decisions. You're going to make some mistakes. The question then becomes, what do you do about the mistakes? If you bury them, you don't learn from them. And the formula is this for me, is the value of the learning has to be greater than the cost of the mistake. And then you'll get better each time. That's the principle behind the after-action review as well. So I think this again illustrates the power of asking the right questions that force insights to the fore.
Yeah, it's so powerful, those examples you provide. And I think of my time as the first time I got a manufacturing plant. I was 32 years old and I'd never run a manufacturing plant before. And when I got that job, I thought I had to have all the answers. And I remember thinking, I don't have all the answers, right? But yet I'm taking responsibility for this large manufacturing business. And then through that first plant management role, I learned the value of questions. I learned I didn't have to have all the right answers, but I had to have the right questions, and I had to have the willingness to listen to the answers and think through some of the things that I was hearing from the people that have been there a long time, and they have observed, they've observed the problems and the challenges and what has worked in the past and what hasn't. And so I found the value of questions really important, really being important when I was a young 32-year-old general manager operating my first manufacturing plant. I realized that the expertise was all there, right? And it was just my job to sort of try to get that information out and be able to sort of synthesize it into like a direction of where we needed to go. So it was sort of like, how do I get all this great wisdom and knowledge that we had in this business and sort of bring it up to a way, and questions were the way I found, the best way I found to be able to get that information out and learn from it.
You make a really important point as well, John. It's not just that the quality of the questions, is how you pose them and how you react to the answers.
Hmm.
You can use questions as weapons to expose the ignorance of somebody
Yes.
and to expose the fact that they, not performed very well. And I used to practice law in my first career, and cross-examination questions are used as weapons.
Hmm.
These are absolutely the opposite. They're questions that are used as invitations to learn.
Hmm.
And as you say, the intellectual humility, not to push your own idea, but to say, I'm here to genuinely learn what you think. I'm suspending my own beliefs in this. I want to learn from you and listen sincerely to the answers. And that again is the technique. We've all had the gotcha questions in the boardroom, right? That put somebody on defensive.
Yeah, for sure. And I've been in those board meetings. I've been embarrassed by certain questions.
Yeah.
Uh, why are we even in this business? I've had that question given to
Yeah.
me,
Well, I
and I'm
mean,
like, I don't know. You've just hired me to run it.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
I don't know
How
what
did
to
you come
say.
up with that idea? Right.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I've been put on the spot before. I know that feeling, and it's terrible. But I think questions with, like you said, curiosity, and humility, and willing to listen to different ideas.
Yeah.
I often find that sometimes, the best ideas come from different sources that you wouldn't expect. So, like, for example, for me, I found young people and introverts. I found some of the coolest ideas have come from people that haven't been doing it forever, or introverts who've been thinking about things and not talking about. So, young people and introverts, I found to be a source of kind of inspiration or ideas that often get ignored, I think, sometimes in companies.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's getting diversity of viewpoints out on the table,
Yeah.
and young, old, and not always the most senior people, but people down in the ranks, people that are really at the forefront of doing things, the sales folks, etc. I mean, they're observing competition on the ground. The competition doesn't occur in the executive suite.
Mm.
It occurs on the ground, at ground level. So getting out and observing regularly is a form of questions as well as an executive, a senior executive. You've got what I call, as you become really senior, uh, the curse of power.
Mm.
People begin to
Yes.
tell you what they think you want to hear. And secondly, you're very far removed from what's happening at ground level. So you have to question yourself. You have to go out into the marketplace, ask questions about what's happening, and observe what's occurring as well.
I'm glad you mentioned that, the curse of power. I think that's one of the things that I've recognized over my career is that when you walk into a room, the dynamics change,
Yeah.
and so like, everybody's like now going to try to impress the boss, right? And that's
Yeah.
the worst situation. You don't want that. You actually want that honest feedback, that the
Yes.
honest explanation, but you do get a sense of where people shift when they see the boss, right? And your presence affects what comes out in sometimes in meetings. So sometimes I'll actually walk out of a meeting and say, or I'll say, why don't you guys brainstorm on this issue a bit? I'm gonna go for a walk, and
Great
uh
idea.
and I'm gonna come back because I feel like I'm negatively affecting just by my presence in a meeting.
Yeah, we have to be careful. Well, one thing is suddenly your jokes get a lot funnier. Did you notice that?
I think yes, they got much funnier the more senior I got.
And the other thing is that when you offer a viewpoint, it comes across as the voice of authority.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's not what you want. You want to be a contributor to the debate. I love the technique of withdrawing a little bit and let them flow freely without this hovering authority over them, feeling judged as they have the conversation.
Yeah.
When I put people in groups very often, I say, well, if it's online, um, I'll be observed, but I'll be on mute. I'm not yet a coach or anything. But I'm beginning to question myself. Is it a good idea, even on mute, to be there as an observer while they're discussing? Because they think, well, they're being observed. I mean, they're kind of in the zoo, and
Yeah.
here I'm a spectator to see how well they're doing. Perhaps I should just do the John formula and
Yeah.
leave them to themselves and then listen afterwards what they have to say. I like that a lot.
Yeah, well, I think it's that curse of power that I've noticed throughout. Just as the more senior I got, the more, my title, he was the vice president, and suddenly, now I'm CEO, and so the
Right.
CEO says something, they just sort of expect that. Well, that's like you said, that's the authority speaking, and it's like, no,
Yes.
there's an idea I'm putting out there, so
Yes. Yes.
so I love that. So one of the areas you actually talked about this, the idea of it is important for leaders to sometimes get out of the office and take a walk. And tell us a little bit about the idea of sort of kind of removing yourself sometimes from the action, just to have a think and to think through things. Why is that so important for leaders?
There's a psychological aspect to this. That if you've been hammering away at a problem and find no solution, don't keep hammering. Move yourself and do something different and create a different kind of context. And then you're likely to get a breakthrough. Now, people can read a book or go, to the cinema or do whatever it is. But walking has a particular magic. I discovered this by accident. And I thought it was just idiosyncratic. It was just me having this experience. But I developed this habit throughout my corporate career, 20 years as a CEO, based in New York. I always walked for 2 miles.
Hmm.
Yes, it was raining. Snow was okay, but all weather, etc. Through Central Park, which is a nice walk. 2 miles, I'd measured it, 30 minutes. And at the beginning of this habit, I thought, well, I've got to do this walk prior to going into the office. And I've got to do a little talk tonight. Somebody's retiring. I got to make a speech. So I'll, collect my thoughts on this while I'm walking. Well, after about 3 minutes, that particular agenda item vanished out of my head. And suddenly, unbidden, came a creative thought about something else I'd been tussling with and was still unsolved. And this began to be, quite a phenomenon. And I thought, well, this is just the way I tick, this is the way I function. My assistant at the office, Joanne, knew me very well because I walked in without saying a word, went straight to my notebook and wrote down a few things, and then said, "Good morning, Joanne." And I got my coffee. But she knew, don't disturb me before I'd made my notes on the ideas that had come up. And sometimes people would tease me. And I remember once in Australia, I said, "I've got to walk before we start our business day." I love walking in the botanical gardens in Sydney. They're absolutely spectacular. And so after this, we began a meeting, and it was, I think, the second day, and we still had a holdover issue. And I said, I had this idea based on our discussion yesterday. And I mentioned it, and they said, we see you've gone for your walk, right?
They know you.
Yeah, it's now, there's some wonderful examples of this. There's a scientific basis to it. It's not just me. Walking releases a chemical called BDNF that energizes our neurons, makes them function more efficiently, and endorphins that induce a feeling of well-being. So there's a chemical reaction when you walk as well. There's something aerobic, and you walk, and your mind then opens up to these creative ideas. And I think of great examples in history of breakthroughs coming from people walking. Uh, the invention of electricity. We always think of Thomas Edison. Well, of course, he did the light bulb, but he also developed direct current electricity. Now, that has a disadvantage. It can only travel short distances, and then it needs a relay station. So it's extremely expensive to cover a wide range of territory like the USA. Nikola Tesla, conceptually said, there's an alternative called alternating current that can travel a long way from one source of transmission, but couldn't solve the methodology. He struggled and struggled with this in his laboratory in the US. People thought he was a little nuts. Eventually dropped it. They thought it was a lost cause. And he was going for a walk in a park in Budapest when the idea of alternating current and a way to apply it flew into his head. And he rushed back, noted it down, and what we owe now to the efficient electrification of large areas of territory is alternating current developed during a walk by Nikola Tesla.
Mm.
James Watt had a similar idea about harnessing steam power for locomotives. The original steam engines were 20-ton things to drain water out of coal mines. And he was thinking about this is an incredible source of power. I wonder if we can use it for locomotion.
Mm.
Not 20 tons, that doesn't work. Literally he went for a Sunday afternoon walk. And he says in his journal, as I was passing the herd's house, the people, neighbors called herd, the idea flew into my head of how to do this, and we owe locomotive steam power to James Watt's walk on a Sunday afternoon.
I think what's really important about that too is you sort of, at least in the modern day, is you're disconnecting from media too. I think part of the time is we don't spend enough time being bored. We go right to our phones all the time, and we're filled 24/7 with music or podcasts, and so we don't take that time to quiet our minds and let our minds give us answers. And with a walk, you sort of have to, especially if you don't, you're not wearing headphones or anything, you're not listening to anything, you're sort of forced to be in your mind, and let yourself have those thoughts and let those thoughts bubble up and not be sort of distracted by technology.
Unchained.
Yeah, you're unchained. Exactly. Exactly. Well, this has been fantastic, Willie. I mean, we just sort of scratched the surface of this book and all that you have to offer in all your decades of experience. But what final message would you like to leave with our listeners today?
Well, people must develop their own command center. And I would just urge you to be deliberate and intentional about doing that. And I will just share mine as a matter of interest. Um, I'm not young anymore. I have to preserve my energy in what I do. Used to a young buck, and you've got all most of your life ahead of you. But I've developed a mantra, a motto, if you like, which runs as follows. There are three things. First one is never retire. Reinvent yourself, do something different with your life. To retire is to withdraw from life. Never retire. Second one is never stop learning. Keep learning. I think of Oliver Wendell Holmes, famous Supreme Court judge when he was 91. FDR went to visit him on his birthday and he found the old man reading Plato. He said, what are you doing? He said, I'm improving my mind.
Mm.
Never stop learning. And the third one becomes crucially important when you grow older. Lead life at a reasonable pace. And that's not easy to do. It means, learning how to modulate, fit your actions to the energy that's available and learn to say no in a graceful way.
That is fantastic, and it's such good advice. And maybe you're listening to this and you say, well, that's not my mantra, I'm at a different place in my life. Yeah, it isn't, but you should have that as a command center. Like, what are the three things that are most important to you, and make sure you're living those things out. And I mean, I love the idea of never retire, never stop learning, and live life, at a reasonable pace. I those things. I'm 58, so I'm starting to approach, that part of my life as well. And so I'm learning that. I mean, I'm a 58-year-old doctoral candidate, so I guess I'm never stop learning. So so I guess I fit that mantra as well. So this has been fantastic, Willie. I really appreciate it. How can our listeners find out more about you and all of your books?
Um, my website is Willie Pietersen, one word, williepetersen.com. And the spelling
Fantastic.
of my last name is a bit weird. It's Pietersen. But that'll find my website and all my writings and books, etc.
Absolutely. We're going to put a link in the show notes for Willie's website. And again, if something is really resonated in this conversation and you want to, explore more of the ideas that Willie has in this book and just in the things that he teaches, on strategy, please reach out to him. He's the expert. Our job here on the podcast is to introduce you to experts. Willie is that expert. He's got a lifetime of experience. If something resonated, please reach out to Willie. Get this book, Leadership, The Inside Story. You're going to get decades of wisdom from consulting to being a CEO. This is, and being a professor, this is going to, all this information is going to help you become a better leader. So learn from the people who have been there before you, and you're going to be better as a leader. Willie, thanks for coming on the show, and thank you for sharing your story and your expertise and your wisdom to our audience.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you again. Well, that is it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.